Well, yesterday, May the 3rd, the Legal Resources Center, LRC, and its partner attorneys, on behalf of thousands of mine workers, reached an historic class action settlement with Occupational Lung Disease, which is OLD working group, which will now see compensation being paid to all eligible mine workers suffering from silicosis and or tuberculosis. This is the first class action of its kind here in South Africa, but to tell us more what it all means and what happens going forward, we now joined in our studios in Johannesburg by Charles Abrams from Abraham Kiewitz Attorneys. Good morning to you, Charles. Thank you so much for coming through. Now, 5 billion rand that will be forked out by these gold mining companies. This has been hailed as historic, as I said on my introduction, the first one of its kind here in South Africa.
It is indeed an historic, moment for miners who had been suffering for years, not just decades, but for centuries with occupational lung disease such as silicosis and tuberculosis. This is a major milestone, for those miners. It's a matter that has started almost 14 years ago, and in the last 6 years it has gained traction, and yesterday was a monumentous occasion, for miners, where we've concluded a settlement where the mining companies have made provision in excess of 5 billion rand. Yeah,
very historic indeed. As you say, this has been dragging for many years, over 13 years, so it hasn't been easy at all for you as attorneys representing these workers.
Not at all. Yeah. So we started with a single test case because there was a sense that mining companies were immune, that you could not sue them civilly. And we sought to challenge that, and that in itself was a major battle. We'd gone from the High Court to the Supreme Court of Appeal, and we lost on both instances. And we, went on to the Constitutional Court, and finally the Constitutional Court in 2011 gave us the green light to say that you may proceed, and we then decided to do so by way of a class action.
Well, I believe it's well done to you guys for really not giving up on this particular case. But who exactly is set to benefit from this class action? Because from what we're reading, the claims dates back to around 1965?
Indeed so. So by virtue of, the nature of this case, it is a class action, so there is a class period, and the period is from 1965 until to date. And so all those, who had contracted silicosis and or tuberculosis will certainly benefit, from, this class action. Then, of course, there are also those who have died, mine workers who have died, with silicosis. Their dependents will also be eligible, to benefit, as well as, some of the miners, who had died of tuberculosis. Their dependents, likewise, would be able to benefit.
All right, okay. So from where you're sitting, are you happy with the amount? Is it a good payout?
Let me say that given the fact that we're dealing with, diseases that are and were debilitating, diseases that have taken life, one can never say that you are happy, with the amounts, that have paid, that are being paid out. It can never undo that kind of damage. But I think if one looks at what has been put, forward and what we've been able to agree upon, it is commensurate to what we believe, in a civil court, payments, miners would have been eligible for payments.
Yeah, and as we said, of course, the claims go back to many years ago from 1965. Some may not be with us anymore. Some are migrant workers from Lesotho and other neighboring countries. So how will they know if they're set to benefit? What happens now going forward?
It's a very good question. So what will happen now is that we will, now that we've concluded the agreement, we will now approach the court. And we hope to approach the court sometime in June to ask the court to give its provisional approval. After the provisional approval, we will publish this settlement as wide as possible. We have operations in various countries other than South Africa. It spans as far as Swaziland, Lesotho, Mozambique, Botswana, and other far-flung places. And we wanted to advertise it as widely so that people can give input, comment, etc. And then sometime in September, October, we would like to go back to court and ask the court to grant a final approval to this. And once the final approval has been granted, we will then proceed to have the trust set up, and that will then be the start of miners then being able, to claim should they be eligible. But the trust will have a very important task, not only of calling on mine workers to come, it also needs to go out. And so it will have a span of 12 years within which, to undertake its operations.
All right, so there's going to be a period set out to meet with all the parties affected. For those who are watching now, they can't really get in touch with you as it is now. They have to wait for that particular period.
Absolutely, that is correct. So we are saying now to those who are quite anxious and wanting, to do, we say that, for the moment, hold on. We need to go through the court process first for the court, to approve. And once that approval, has been granted, then the trust, will become, active, operational. And the idea is tracking and tracing is critical, to, the objectives, of this trust, to reach not only in South Africa, but to all the far-flung, Southern African countries.
Yeah, and Charles, when one really goes back to read more about this particular case, it looks like there were so many inequalities between your black and white miners. Of course, there's really like so much to look into. But who do we blame the situation on in this regard? Do we blame it on the government and its limited regulations, perhaps?
Look, we cannot, unfortunately, ignore, the legacy, of this country. The legacy, of apartheid. But if we also look at the legacy of mining, and when we look at that, we have to go back to when mining started, way back in the early 1900s, and the legislation was particularly aimed at mining at all costs, as opposed to really the health and safety, of miners. But I think over time, mining companies have increasingly become, aware of the enormous cost and the burden that mining, has had and continues, to have on, its workforce. And as a result, if one looks at in 1994, the very first commission that had been established by the new government, ANC-led government, was the Commission into Mining, the Leon Commission. And arising out of that, some key recommendations came out. We've also seen the introduction of the new mine health and safety legislation of 1996. So I think that, pre-1994 and post-1994, we've seen gradual change, both in terms of the legislative environment as well as, I would also, say that, corporate behavior. But there's still a long way that needs, to go.
But it looks like the government is coming on board. On Workers' Day in Port Elizabeth, I bumped into the Minister of Health, Dr. Motsoaledi, who was basically telling me that he has established about 4 one-stop areas where miners, of course, who are affected, they can, come forward and present their case. The government is, willing to take it further in terms of compensation. So it looks like there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Absolutely, and the idea is that, the trust that will eventually be established, the government will have one representative, on the trust, alongside representatives from the claimants and representatives, from the companies. And the idea is that there would be, engagement with, the government's, operations, the one-stop shops, and so on, so that there is no need for unnecessary duplication. And so I think that, this is really, an opportunity where both, parties, both on the industry, us as the claimant representatives and the claimants, as well as, the government, can work collaboratively to try and undo some of, the dreadful, harms that have taken place.
We have to leave it at that, but thank you so much for coming through. And once again, well done to all the legal teams who were involved in this case.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Well, Charles Abrams from Abraham Kiewitz Attorneys talking to us about this historic class action. An amount of about 5 billion rand will be paid to all those mine workers who were affected and infected by silicosis and tuberculosis-related diseases.